And I can't gush enough about these 3 wonderful interns. We have had just such a fantastic group this year. And I don't know what I'm going to do when they're not here. Like, they stay with me for 6 weeks and then all of a sudden they're gone, and it's like I lose part of myself. So without further ado, and I should probably introduce myself. I feel like I know everybody in here, but I'm Lindsay, and I'm the program coordinator for the HAWK program. But the real people that you came to hear tonight are standing right over here. So I'm not going to even say anything else. I'm going to let them stand up and just take it away because they are just far too good at talking about everything that they did. So stand up.
All right, welcome everyone to the HAWK internship final presentation. Today we're going to walk you through what the internship was, what we took away from it, and then we're going to talk about all the things that we did. So the HAWK internship is a 6-week-long paid high school internship for local high school juniors and seniors. And the goal of the internship is to provide important experience in natural resources, careers around professionals in the office and in the field. So this is us. I'm Foster Hobbs. I'll be a junior and I'm attending Enterprise High School this year.
I'm Kinston Nightfong. I'll also be a junior attending Enterprise High School.
I am Anna Mohol, and like everyone else, I'm going into my junior year at Enterprise.
Okay, so I'm just going to dive straight in and take you guys through, I'm going to start by talking about the first week of what we did. So, the very second day, we piled into the bus and headed down to Baker for the Baker Resources Roundtable. The goal of this meeting was to gather community members and create an organization in Baker similar to the one here in Wallowa with Wallowa Resources. So Wallowa Resources' function there was to facilitate that conversation, identify obstacles and barriers that they face as a group and as a community, and to discover solutions and creative ways to get around the problems that they face as a group and come up with solutions that will affect everyone. So after introductions led by Nils, we split into different groups, each one talking about a different section of important subjects that Baker is dealing with. So these groups were Wildland-Urban Interface, which deals with the bridge between the wildlands and people building homes and houses there in the urban areas. Tourism and recreation, pretty self-explanatory. Youth engagement, water resource sustainability, and forest product markets. So the group that I was in was the WUI group, Wildland Urban Interface, and we had a 45-minute long discussion, and after I got to talk to these people I never met, that was really interesting to talk about what they thought about this problem, and we talked about barriers. And after we discovered what we thought the main things in the way of progress were, I actually got to stand up and give a presentation in front of the whole group about these problems. For me, that was one of the strongest points of the internship because I really enjoy public speaking. And I got to do that in front of people I'd never met, including a state senator, and it felt really important, and I really enjoyed that part of the internship. And at the end of that meeting, what they took away from that was a compiled list of solutions, short-term and long-term goals for Baker Resources to work together towards as a community. So what we took away as a group was that communication is essential in any business situation, especially when dealing with natural resources, in which there's often many, many entities that you have to bring together and conjoin and listen to what everyone has to say to discover the best prospect for moving forward. Common grounds, there were a lot of different viewpoints going into that conversation. Some people thought that this was the way to do things, no questions asked. Other people thought other end of the spectrum, and we had to find solutions that will benefit both of those ends of the spectrum and affect everyone positively. Group organization and leadership I also learned is super important, and without it, progress is really hard to reach and really hard to grasp. Okay, so the next big activity we did was we met with David Bates, Watermaster. And what that looked like was, first we sat down with David in a conference room here in this building, and we talked about water rights, junior water rights, senior water rights, and we learned laws concerning water. This was really interesting, and it was something I hadn't learned before, and I got a lot of useful information from that. And after that, he showed us his GIS program, which is essentially a satellite image overlaid with resources and information that when moused over or clicked on, it will open up a database of who owns the property, who owns what the water right is, all this different information, like what body of water feeds this property, and whether it's a junior water right or a senior water right. And it's a really big database, and I think that's a really cool example of how technology is being integrated into the natural resources field in the modern day, which is also kind of a big theme, something we touched on a lot throughout the internship. We also learned some of the other things he does. He mediates water usage confrontation. Two people have a problem, who gets the water? He goes in and tells them what's going to happen, and he mediates that conflict. Allocating water, who gets the water? And he records and documents where the water is, how much water there is, who's using the water now, who's going to use the water later, and it's a really important job. Next slide, please. Alright, after that we headed up in the bus to the dam at the lake, where with David we met with Jim Height, who runs the dam at the lake. So, he taught us the history of the dam, and he showed us how using the big cranks, which you actually take a drill and a gear system will turn the big cranks, and those will raise or lower the floodgates, depending on polarity of which way you turn it, of course. So he also told us how important it is to be super vigilant and responsible, because many of you might not know that the dam at the lake is actually a high hazard dam. If it were to break, potentially there's a lot of loss of property and or life. So it's a huge responsibility, and it's a really, really important job. And he showed us how much water can be in the dam at any given time. There are indicators on the dam that show what the current water level is, and that show how much water it can get to before you need to really open up those floodgates and kind of let it settle down a bit, especially during storm events or cataclysmic events such as that. One last thing we did at the dam before we moved on, he showed us his measurement instruments, and one of which was a bubbler that fed down to the bottom, and actually it would send the information to a device which had a satellite uplink, so at any given time he could view the information, how much water is coming through, the water pressure, even temperature, important things like this to know, so that at any time he could view that information where he had a connection to the satellite. And that's another cool example of technology being integrated into natural resource fields. Next slide, please. After that, with David, we headed up to the head of the lake. He showed us another electronic monitoring system in a river up there, which was a box that he had installed himself that was powered by a solar panel, and that ran a similar bubbler to measure the volume of the river, how much water was flowing on that given day, and that also had a satellite uplink. We talked in the car about some well digging on the way back to Enterprise and well digging regulations. We touched on that briefly. And then we did a manual river assessment using a crane-like device that you can kind of see in that picture, that lowered a lead torpedo into the water, and we measured how wide the river was, how deep it was, and we took estimates and measurements and determined what the water flow was for that day at that time. And that was cool, and we recorded that information. So, after that, the next thing we did this week, the first week, was the K4 STEM, collaborating with Building Healthy Families. We did a K4 STEM Science Day for kindergartners through fourth graders. So what that is, K through 4 STEM, is kindergartners through fourth graders learning about science, technology, engineering, and math. trying to get them interested and curious about those fields for possible future careers. And even more than that, just to get them curious, because these are kindergartners through 4th graders. So what that looked like, we set up several microscope stations, and we found cool little objects to put under the dissecting microscopes, such as flowers or bugs, or even moss and rocks. And we had the kids come and look through the microscopes, and they were just blown away. They were really interested to see, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that is that up close. They saw the little hairs on the bugs, and oh, that's so gross. They thought that was really cool, and it was cool to see how curious they were and how interested they were. We also did an activity with, we had images of something zoomed up way up close, and they had to guess what that was. And some of the answers they came up with were quite preposterous, but when we told them what they actually were, they were like, oh, I can see it now, I can see it. And that was really cool. So the big takeaways from the K-4 STEM project, it's really important to get the next generation involved, interested, and enthusiastic about science, about nature, because they're the future stewards. They're the ones going to be taking care of the world, and it could use some taking care of right now. And another thing I learned about leadership, with the kids you're leading, if you're interested, if you're invested, and you're enthusiastic about what you're learning, then they're going to follow your lead, and they're going to be interested and invested too. And I think that's one of the biggest things I took away from this project. Alright, so that was about the first week. I'm going to hand things off to my colleague Kinnison, and he's going to continue this through the second week or so. Thank you.
For the second week, we did a bit of private land management. We met up with Kelly Berkmeyer, who is a rangeland ecologist. Kelly Berkmeyer has been working for the Krebs Ranch to help manage their land sustainably, with the goal that it is in better shape than in the future than it is now. With that, we went and we saw some rams being sheared. We also learned about how ag has become digitalized with the DNA samples that give DNA. They're giving data with that, and they're putting it into a huge database where they'll be able to see what traits are better from the different sheep than compared to with going and seeing, well, this sheep looks like it had better wool this year than last year, possibly, and taking a 5-second look, when then now they will just be able to get on their computer and say this sheep's better than this sheep, than that sheep. We also did a little bit of weed management with her. We went out and we pulled some Medusa head. Then we went and we mapped out the boundaries of a large patch of Medusa head. We went and we'd find where it is thickest and start finding where it is not very much, and figure out the boundaries for a large map of where it is mostly concentrated at, so they could go and spray that for a later date. So some of the dangers with the Medusa head: it can build a thatch layer that native plants cannot get through, it can create a monoculture, and it can create a fire hazard that will be able to go, and then all that will be is the seeds from the Medusa head. So if there's a thatch layer that the other seeds cannot go through, there will possibly be just all Medusa head and then no other plants left. Then it would be able to just, fires would go through and it would just get very bad. We also learned about some of the root systems of prairie plants, and also about the difference of compact soil and non-compact soil. With the compact soil, there is where the soil will go and get compacted into layer upon layer, and then the soil will not be able to hold water, and the roots of the plants will not be able to go into it very well. And then the non-compact soil has aggregates and the rhizomes that will be able to allow water to go into and will hold water better, and then the roots will be able to go into it. And how the soil will get compacted is if the cows are in there while the ground is somewhat moist and they trample it down, or if there's an area where vehicles are pulling in and out of multiple times, in the soil will just be compacted multiple times. With Kelly, we did a little bit of riparian management. We talked about some different plants that help streams. We also talked about how the creek there had been channelized and how that was bad. In the 50s, there was a big push to get the water going faster and a more straighter way to where it needed to be. And then later times they found out that that was not necessarily correct, so now they're planning to change it back to a more natural path. They're going to use these man-made beaver dam structures you can see there, and then they'll put those a little bit behind where the old channel is, and then the water will be pushed into the old channel and be set to its meandering state. Next, for what we did after the range management, we went and we did a integrated biomass research tour, IBR. We met with Cal Petrosini, a renewable energy manager for CSI, Community Solutions Incorporated. We went to the processing plant in Wallowa. We met with the owners, David and Joshi Schmidt. They showed us their operations. So how IBR came about was the loss of the majority of the logging mills in the 90s when all of that stuff got shut down from a result of new environmental regulations, which then created a loss of jobs, far less logging, and they needed a new way to create jobs and find a way to use the small diameter timber that was just being burnt and not being used anymore. So we went, and when we saw a couple different parts of the plant, we also saw some of the jobs, and we got to see how the biomass works. With the biomass, they'll have a chip spot where all these chips get categorized, and if the chips are too big, they will get put through the shredder again and get put into their right size so they can be sent over to LeGrand to be put in a processing plant to make particle board. If the chips are too small, they will get sent into a area where they'll get put on a conveyor belt and get sent over to the biomass, which will then burn those in multiple stages and then produces heat, which then will create a steam in a closed pipe system, which will go and then heat up a kiln that will dry firewood for they can sell overseas. Now, next I would like to introduce our next colleague, Anna, so she can do the rest of the presentation for the last couple weeks that we've done.
Alright, so another project we did is we helped with some aspen management, and with throughout the West, aspens are struggling. They're having a hard time, and there are many different causes of this, different causes in different regions, and so people have been working hard to restore the aspen populations. Aspens are important for areas because of many different reasons. We can get the next slide, thanks. And the aspens are good habitat for many different creatures, for birds, for nesting. While the trees are alive and after they're dead, they're good for cavity nesters. They're also important because they provide another sort of type of habitat for people, animals, because it sort of adds variation other than just the normal conifer forests and prairies that are around here. Aspens are also fairly important because they are a good food source for many different critters. They are in danger for a whole bunch of different reasons, as you can see. One of which is aspens have the female and male flower parts on different trees. So each tree is either male or female. And in Wallowa County, they are all female, so they can't reproduce using seeds. But aspens are pretty cool because they can reproduce asexually via cloning. They send out lateral underground stems through which they send out hormones, and from there the clones will sprout and then grow into genetically identical clones. And when these clones, these small aspens grow up, the hormones needed to have them sprout often are sent out by after the mature trees have been damaged in some way. So with historical fire practices of putting out every single little fire that pops up, the mature aspens haven't been receiving this disturbance, so they haven't been producing the hormones to send up more sprouts. So that's one of the main reasons why the aspen population has been declining. Also, when the sprouts do germinate, when they do grow, they are often eaten, and because apparently they're really delicious. Livestock, cattle, and also deer and elk will just totally eat the sprouts. And if they are eaten and they have come up, and then they need a bunch of sunlight. So if there are tall conifers in the area that are shading out the light, then they aren't getting enough sun, and then they still don't grow. So everything's got to be pretty perfect for them to grow. And this last one isn't so much a problem here in Wallowa County, but in many other areas, drought has played a huge role in the decline of aspen populations. So at Target Springs, which is where we went, as one of Wallowa Resources' first projects, they teamed up with the Forest Service to put some fences around the different aspen groves. And this project had two main goals, one of which was to protect the aspens, obviously, so that the livestock and the deer and the elk couldn't get in and browse the young saplings. But it was also to test which type of fence is the most effective. They had some buck and pole fences, some fences with hog panels, and some barbed wire fences. And they were seeing which type of fence was the most effective for keeping herbivores out, which is easiest to maintain and put up, and what are the most cost effective, and what the best combination of those is. So then they mapped out where the groves are so that they could go find them again, which is pretty important. You want to know where they are. And originally, when they first put up the fences, they monitored to see sort of what the aspens were like within the groves, how many there were, and what sort of shape they were in. And then not long after the project started, the Forest Service had issues finding personnel to continue to monitor the groves. And so they just sort of didn't monitor them for a while. And about 4 years ago or so, the Hawk program started to go out and help monitor the groves more. And so as you can see here, this is a map of the aspen enclosures at Target Springs. There are about 11 of the enclosures with the different types of fences. And so that's where we were, what we were doing. And we went out with Jerry Hustafa and Jean Dinkaris. And Jerry works for the Forest Service. Jean works here at Wallowa Resources. We discussed the different methods of protecting aspens and did some minor repairs to the exclosure fences, specifically the buck and pole fences. We removed some of the small conifers from within the exclosures so that they don't grow large and start shading out the young aspens. Then we did 2 types of assessments for 2 different groves of aspens. And we did those groves specifically because they are going to have the fences around them removed. And it is important for us to get some baseline data of what's in the aspen grove now and how they're doing so that we can see how much of a difference there is once the fences are removed. And so the two types of assessments we did was a full assessment and a rapid assessment. The main difference between them is that the full assessment has a transect line where you set up a line and walk through and see how many aspens of different sizes of diameters and heights there are along the transect. For both of the assessments, we took photo points and did sort of a quick map of the grove and figured out the sort of ratio between how many young aspens and young conifers, and then how many mature aspens to mature conifers. And so the full assessment was just sort of more in-depth. The rapid assessment was more of a snapshot. So another main project that we did is we went out on the 5th and 6th grade Wren camping trip. It was a week-long trip with 8 campers, the 3 of us interns, Lindsay and Emily. And we went up to Indian Crossing and camped there, which it was a wonderful spot. It was beautiful. The mosquitoes were kind of bad, but other than that, it was pretty fun. And so the main goal of the whole trip was to sort of get kids outside and just sort of get them camping and stuff. So what we did is we taught them some basic camping stuff with like helping them set up their tents and keeping their gear organized, making sure they're prepared for hikes, and doing their dishes, and having proper fire safety, and all that important stuff. We also went on a few hikes. We hiked up to Blue Hole one day, and another day we drove up to Fish Lake and hiked around there. Throughout the week, we taught some lessons on multiple different things, such as knot tying and how to use maps and compasses. The 3 of us interns were in charge of teaching the Leave No Trace principles. Leave No Trace is a set of guidelines, basically, to help minimize your impact in the outdoors. We had a few activities for each guideline, for each principle, that sort of help explain what the principle is and sort of what it means. And I think the kids enjoyed most of them. It was pretty fun for us. We also played some games. We played Capture the Flag, Camouflage, which is kind of like hide and seek, but you're not hiding. You have to see the seeker, but they can't move. It's really fun. And King Elephant, which is sort of a rhythm and memory game, which is high stress sometimes, but also really fun. And we also just sort of hung out around the campfire as a group and told jokes and riddles, and the riddles sometimes got a little bit interesting when the campers decided to start making up their own riddles. So that was kind of fun. Sort of the main reason, one of the reasons for the program is to get sort of kids to have some sort of basic knowledge of wilderness survival, sort of, with the knots and compass and all those sort of things. But sort of the main goal is to get people outside so they can gain an appreciation for the outdoors, so that when they become older, then they will be the next generation to be the stewards of land, and if they have an appreciation of it, then they will take better care of it, hopefully. So the last main field thing we did was we went out with the LEAP interns. LEAP is a program with the Nature Conservancy. It's an internship. It stands for Leaders in Environmental Action for the Future. So we went out with Austin, Isaac, and Ben, and their leader, whose name is also Austin, but since he's a boss, as a joke, should have called him Boston. We also went out with Mike Beachy, who is one of the land managers of the Zumwalt Prairie. And so on the first day, we went out on the Zumwalt and we went to Coots Corral, and we all met up there, and we pulled a whole bunch of Medusa head out there, and then at another location just a little ways down the road. As we were pulling Medusa head, we discussed briefly how TNC has a integrated management protocol, meaning they use multiple methods to control the Medusa head out there, and So they both hand pull it and they spray it using multiple different sprays to sort of try to eliminate it completely. So on the second day, we did a little bit of riparian management, restoration stuff. And so in the morning we went to Doug McDaniel's ranch and observed how the section of the Wallowa River that goes through his property, in the 50s it had been channelized like so many other rivers and creeks and stuff around here. And that had caused some problems with the substrate in the bottom of the river, the gravel down there, so that the salmon didn't have a good place to build their redds, and so the salmon populations were declining there. And so about 15 years ago, they restored it to the more meandering course that it had been historically, and the salmon population has increased a bit. So later that day, we went to Elk Creek, where there are some riparian cages around some trees there. The cages are to protect the trees from browsing from livestock and deer and elk. The trees are very important along the riparian zone because they, their root systems hold the soil in place and helps prevent erosion. So while we were out there, we took some photo points of the riparian cages, and we sort of surveyed how many trees, which species were in each of the cages, and if the cages needed any sort of maintenance done on them, or if they needed to be removed or something like that. So that was sort of our final field day, and since then we've been doing some office work, and overall the internship has been such a wonderful experience. We had a great time. We'd like to thank everyone who took time out of their day to come out and work with us and sort of explain sort of what they do within the natural resource field and just sort of make the internship great. We'd also like to extend our gratitude to the Wallowa Resource staff, board donors, and the Youth Development Council, who have made this internship possible and so wonderful. All right, thank you. Great. So yeah, if you have any questions.
I have a question for Kennison. So you talked about these man-made beaver dams.
Yes.
Did anyone talk about the possibility of reintroducing beavers to those dams?
They didn't talk about that. They just talked about adding those sort of structures to make the river, because those will kind of fill in with gravel. Because all it is like some sticks weaved in and out. So it's not really a beaver dam, they would say, but it's more of just like a structure that's sort of man-made, but it'll also be, if something happens, that like there's not a bunch of metal or anything like that in the water.
There's also no trees where they're planning on doing this, so I don't think beavers will.
I do, yeah, another question. Alright, thanks for coming, everyone.
So
No, I have another. Nice try.
So I want to just make a comment. As you can tell, we've done a lot, right? We pack it into this internship, and it's a lot of information to take in. It's a lot of new information, and while I help kind of edit and guide this process of their presentation, this really is 100% their work. They are, remembering it and taking notes and kind of coalescing everything and putting together their own personal takeaways as a group. So it makes it that much more impressive in my eyes because it's not me telling them what to put in this presentation.
I have a question. Sorry. For any one of you guys, how do you think you're different now? What's changed for you having gone through this?
We should all answer that. I definitely feel like I learned specifics about natural resources, and I also do feel more invested and more interested in possibly a career in natural resources. It kind of opens your eyes to see like how important these things are and how many people you can reach out to and touch just by taking part in conservation and taking part in action on behalf of resources in the world in general, I guess.
Yeah, so it's been a nice experience to sort of help expose us to the different possible career options and all the different things that make up sort of working with natural resources and how many different sides to that there are.
I think my takeaway from this sort of was seeing how many different options there are out there compared to, like, not knowing before how, like, you go out and you think there's like a few careers here or there in science or math and stuff like that. Then when you actually get out here, you realize how many different areas of things you can go into and different jobs there are.
I was getting up every morning and going to work in the middle of summer.
Experience.
It's not good. Good.
Alright, you said you had another question?
I was just gonna say, Kendrick wants to know, because she's never done it.
Yeah. I'm thinking about it sometimes. I don't really know.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. It was interesting when you were talking about working with the K through 4 group, that you were helping them and helping them recognize that they were gonna be the next stewards, that they were coming up. And that's something that we all kind of like to see, is that the older folks like to see that the younger folks are kind of taking their place and learning the things that need to be done to keep things going. So that's, I really liked seeing that you guys were working with that K through 4 group and the younger group and helping them recognize that they're going to be the next ones coming up.
Thank you.
That was really nice.
I want to hear some of the preposterous ideas that they have.
Well, there was a tip of a ballpoint pen, and it took us forever to figure it out. And I think Lindsay or Emily told us in the end, and they all thought it was like an eyeball.
There's also sort of like an inside of like a cross section of a carrot and how it's sort of star-like inside. You've ever noticed that? And almost every kid thought that it was the sun, which took some sort of explaining, like, these are close up. Like, the sun's really far away. But it was really fun.
There was one of the kids that, I can't remember what picture it was, one kid was on fish or something like that. Because he was like, oh, this looks like a toadfish, this looks like a sea anemone.
These are all fish.
Like, it was some sort of thing he thought was a fish.
He was really happy when we broke out the goldfish.
So I'm gonna have one more just comment, brag on these guys. So part of this internship is, you know, one of the goals is definitely to expose them to the natural resources field and the careers and all the things that are there. But the other part is really becoming an integrated part of our resources and seeing how an organization works. For many of these guys, this is their first kind of professional office job, and just getting to be familiar with the ins and outs and really becoming a part of my team, in which I say, I need you to do this, and they do it. And they never complained. They were always ready and willing to do anything that I asked of them, and they participated in any other program that we were working and helped with events, and I just could not have asked for a better crew. So,
Thank you.
all right, I'm going to get them out of the hot seat. So you guys are great.
Well done. Nice job.